everyone. Welcome. Happy Tuesday. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Bookstore Magic. We are so excited to have Joelle Wellington and Victoria Lee with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Joelle's newest novel, The Blonde Dies First. Before we get officially started, however, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First up, we will be doing some hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Joelle will be around to sign and personalize your books at the alcove next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And finally, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of The Blonde Dies First online using the link in the live stream description. Okay, now a little bit about tonight's book. Tonight, I defer to the words of our in-house horror expert and enthusiast, Tiffany, who's in the back over there. Tiff says that this book is a love letter to Brooklyn, dripping with classic horror tropes that we all know and love. Not only is this novel full of perfectly executed supernatural spookies, it also definitely tackles themes of gentrification, social class, microaggressions, and so much more. It's horror, it's slasher, it's Brooklyn, it's queer, and it's full of juicy details to discuss. So let me introduce tonight's guests. Joelle Wellington grew up in Brooklyn, where her childhood was spent wandering the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. When she isn't writing, she's reading, and when she's not doing that, she's attempting to bake bread with varying degrees of success or strengthening her encyclopedia-like pop culture knowledge. She's the author of Their Vicious Games and The Blonde Dies First. And as I mentioned earlier, Victoria Lee joins Joelle in conversation tonight. Victoria grew up in Durham, North Carolina, and has a PhD in psychology, which she uses to overanalyze fictional characters and also herself. Lee is the author of A Shot in the Dark and A Lesson in Vengeance, as well as The Fever King and its sequel, The Electric Air. They live in New York City with their partner, cat, and malevolent dog. That's all for me. Please join me in giving Joelle and Victoria a very warm welcome.
Wow. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, see you.
Oh, please. We know one another.
No, I know. I'm going to say it's a bit.
Okay, I'm not very good at those.
The bit is that now you have to tell us what your book's about.
Okay. So The Blonde Dies First is, as everyone knows, is my love letter to Brooklyn. I grew up here. I was unfortunately not born here. I was born on Long Island. Spoiler. Very embarrassing. I know. Super embarrassing. I know. Ugh. No, they immediately brought me here. Like, I was fresh and I was dropped here. I grew up in Brooklyn and I wanted to write a love letter after writing my first novel, which was a not-so-love letter to my secondary education.
I remember.
So, yeah, now I was like, maybe I should write about something that didn't traumatize me, something that I loved instead, which happened to be Brooklyn and horror. So, yeah.
I mean, the vibes were definitely very different.
Yes.
Like, you could tell that there was, like, much more, like, love and camp and joy.
Yes.
Just, like, the vibes in this book. But can you give us, like, a brief summary? Just for people who haven't read it, no spoilers.
Yeah, so the book is about a girl named Devin who finds out that her twin sister, Drew, who is a genius, has decided to graduate high school early and didn't tell her. And they go to different schools. Drew, the genius, goes to private school because that's what geniuses do. Mm-hmm. Not that I would know. So Devin decides that since it's her last summer with her twin sister and before they like go to real life or whatever, she wants to have the best summer ever. But that's interrupted when they accidentally summon a demon at a party with a Ouija board. And the demon starts hunting them in slasher killer order. And Devin happens to be blonde. So the blonde dies first, or does she? So yeah, that's the book.
Thank you so much. I mean, and it's amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
So I did the same thing with this book as I did with Their Vicious Games, in that I read it in one night. Which, like, I feel like you probably think at this point that I'm just saying that to say that, but it is 100% true. I was, like, up at 2 a.m, lying there with my Kindle in front of my face.
That's
like,
not good sleep hygiene.
You know what? And my Apple Watch was mad at me for it, too. So I paid, don't worry. But you are now 2 books in. So
Yes.
how does it feel to be a sophomore author, and what do you feel like you've learned in the time since your debut?
I thought it would be impossible to be a sophomore author because I didn't think I would finish the second book. I remember I remember I had this conversation with my friend Cameron, who was in the front row, about how I was about to write my second book, and she was like, well, it's okay if it's hard to write. And I was like, it won't be, I won't have a sophomore slump. I did. It was horrible. I was weeping. I was crying. Like, I had a full outline and refused to write. Like, it was bad for me. And so it was tough to get here, but like, and I thought for a long time that I hated this book, to be honest. But I remember when I first got past pages after like I finished working on it, and I was like, whoa, I'm really funny. I'm like, wow, I kind of ate that. So I had a fantastic time. Like, it was, I don't know, it feels really good, and I feel very accomplished reaching this point.
You 100% should. Like, I feel like usually everybody has a miss, and so far you have not missed with any of your books.
Thank you. I hope I don't miss with the third.
Somehow, I doubt that you will. You are officially an auto-buy author for me, and I'm sure for many of the people here.
Thank you.
So, because you said that it was really funny and you ate that, one of my favorite things about all of your books is the banter. So you have this like knack for witty conversations and humor, as I'm sure you noticed when rereading your own book. So how did you come up with all of this? Does it come naturally? Do you spy on people's coffee shop conversations? Like, I need to know for personal reasons.
Unfortunately, I'm about to reveal the worst part of myself. I'm a former theater kid. Yeah, very embarrassing, humiliating stuff. I was doing musicals every year. Like, terrible. But that's kind of where it comes from. I literally speak out loud to myself like a weirdo. Like, and I'm going back and forth. And I think that's the only way that you can really have strong dialogue and banter, is literally by saying it out loud and like feeling the rhythm of it. Because otherwise, I don't think it works. It's kind of like, again, going back to gross theater stuff, like a comma. in Shakespeare, a comma is a quick breath, but a semicolon is a slightly longer one. And that's how I kind of map out my dialogue in a lot of ways, and I like speak it as if I was back in my Shakespeare class and I'm reciting as, I don't know, like Beatrice or whatever. Yeah, I think that's the way to figure out banter, and like I really do think that it comes down to like almost having conversations in your own head, like how you would want somebody to respond to something that you've come up with that's quick-witted. And I think it also comes from like, sometimes, you know how you come back up with a perfect comeback later on, like hours later, and you're like, oh shit, I should have said that. I always write those down, and I will use it in something that I wrote, and I'll kind of construct a conversation around that.
That's genius. And also, I have now learned more about Shakespeare in this conversation than I learned in high school English. So thank you for that. So the book is clearly a loving homage to horror. How did you balance using those well-loved tropes with making them feel suspenseful and fresh?
I kind of knew from the start that I wanted to twist it, even by having a black girl as the first and the main character who is the blonde. I think often actually people think that it's the black guy that dies first in a horror film, but that's not technically true. It's statistically, like, I guess you could say it's true, because black people aren't very often featured in horror, so when a black person is featured, they will die first. But actually, if you look at the entire canon, it is, like, percentage-wise, the blonde that dies more often first. And I knew from then, I was like, how do I like mix those two things and like subvert them in some way? So even from the onset, I was like, okay. And knowing that this group of characters, it doesn't it has more than one black person, which again is not very horror. So it's like, which black guy would even die first? There's like more than one. So like starting from there is like, that's how I figure out how to subvert these tropes. But then I feel like every time as I outlined and as I went through the story, I would like sit there with this particular trope and I'd be like, okay, in what way have I seen it done? In what way haven't I seen it done? And what way have I seen it done that I like most? Because I do think that nothing is original anymore, and that it's only all in how you like write it. And so I like that's what I very much focused on. And then I think another part of it is making a joke out of a trope is the best way to subvert it. I think a lot. Like one of my main characters, his name is Malachi, and he is a queer black boy, right? And that's not the main part of his personality. The main part of his personality is that he's a lover boy who is obsessed with, he really wants a partner just because. Just because. But I like thinking about how often you also see like the queer character like being targeted in horror. What happens when there's like more than one queer person? And then what happens if there's a joke about how there is more than one queer person, how they should fight it out to who's gonna die first? I think that making a joke out of something like that is an important part to like subverting tropes that way.
That was one of my favorite parts of it, was like how you could simultaneously be really scared and then be like, oh, wait, she did a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think like part of that is like why I think it's a YA versus, because I never approach any of my ideas as in they fit into a specific age category. Like I just don't particularly think that way. And I think that any story can be for anyone. But I think particularly with as a young adult author, I think that I have a responsibility to write something that is for teens as opposed to what's appropriate for teens. Like, I think there's a difference, right? Because like what is appropriate is like something constructed by society and like adults in power, especially conservative adults, right? And so I think a lot about how when I'm approaching horror, like I don't want to overdo it, right? Because like I can get gory, and that was like a note that I got a lot with my editor, where she'd be like, "Relax." Like I had one death that I actually had to have coworkers help me work through, because I was like, "This is what I have," but I feel like my editor says it's too much, and she was right. But like thinking about like if I were that age, is this something that I would be into? And like I want to say yes, but the answer is probably no. Like I'm not great with gore, so like I think always like when appropriate, I thought it was important to undercut the really like heavy gory horror parts with something that's really funny.
Yeah. That brings me to a question that you've proven across 2 books now, that you have a knack for writing these flawed but lovable main characters. Can you tell us about some of Devin's character flaws and why these were so important to explore in a book specifically for teens?
Yeah, Devin is she's the most different from me that I've ever written. I think that she's like very crafty. Which I'm not. She's very like unsure of herself, and also is very convinced of her own point of view. Like, she is the main character in her own story, which, fair, everyone is the main character in their own story. But it's also to the detriment of people around her. I think often Devin gets in her own head, and she's like, this is how it is in front of me. And that is something that I was very like growing up. Like, I was very like, this is all there is, and this is how people view me, and like, this is how we're locked in, and it's my way, and this is how I see it, and that means that it must be true. And I think that Devin is very often she's not someone that sees outside of herself, in terms of she doesn't know how other people see her, and also she is not always interested in seeing other people for how they see themselves. And I think that's important to learn, because that was something I had to learn. growing up. Like I was very like in my own head, and I think Devin's very in her own head in that way. And I think that seeing that growth and trajectory in a novel, and then her not being totally out of that by the end, and having to come to the understanding that that is something that you learn over time. Like I think that's important to show, because I think sometimes in YA that by the end the character is totally different, and like they've had this big revelation, and I'm like, I think we're all works in progress, and all your relationships are always works in progress, and it's okay if not everything is totally emotionally resolved at the end of something. I think that's important to show, and I think that's important to show in a character where, like, I think she ends in a place that is certainly different from the beginning, but I don't think that she's like a finished human being, because you're not supposed to be finished. You're a teenager. Like, that doesn't make sense. Who wants to peak when they're a teenager? That's silly.
No, I think that came across really well, and it was, really fun watching Devin grow and develop across the course of the book, along with the other characters. Like, Drew also had a great little arc. So, I do love learning about the origin stories of mystery and thriller writers. So what was your first sense of mystery in the world, and then how did you come to write those specific ideas into entire books?
Let me think. Oh, I know. I was reading this magical book series. We won't say who it's by. Maybe there's 7 books in it. Who's to say? But I remember reading the first chapter and being really scared by it, because, I don't know, someone may have died, right? We could call him you-know-who. So he died, and I remember I was very, very young when I first read those books, because my parents had them on the bookshelf. And I just used to like climb up the bookshelf and just take random books off. And my parents had this like very broad rule where they were like, okay, like you can read books, I guess, but ask questions. And I remember being very confused by this concept of death, because I didn't have anyone in my life that died when I was very young. Like, I didn't really experience grief like that. I'm very young, and I remember being very confused by it, and like the mystery of that, and like my parents trying to explain to me, and it still wasn't computing. And I think that's when I started, like, you asked mystery, but I'm kind of going into the horror part too, the weird macabre of like me trying to comprehend what death is and how it is an end and a finish, in a way that is not like in my head when I was young, everything was in the context of a book where I could restart it. And you can't do that when a person dies, when something dies. And that really like confounded me. Like, I was very confused by that and that mystery. And it kind of like led me into like exploring mystery and horror in that way, where I was like, that is so interesting. Something is over. Like, it is not something that I can restart. So that's kind of where that came from.
I had never thought about it that way, like just the inherent horror of death. And like, grasping that as a young kid and trying to translate
and
it.
it never scared me, but I was very confused. Like, I was like, I don't get it. Like,
so you're like, let me hyperfixate on this.
Yeah, I was like, what do you mean it's done? Like, the person is dead. What does that mean? So yeah, I think like, and it's funny, I don't think I've thought about that for a really long time. Like, that's like just in the back of my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, somehow you transition from like, how did this person die? What does death mean? To like, what's the most fun way I can kill somebody at this point?
Exactly. And that's when I like started hyperfixating on like horror. Like, I started watching stuff that I shouldn't be watching, and I became obsessed.
I mean, shouldn't be watching. Like, it brought you where you are today. So.
You know, that's what I think. I mean,
just tell your parents that.
Oh, my parents were always so cool about stuff like that, though.
Oh,
like weird movies, weird books. Like, my parents were really cool about that.
My parents would see PG-13 and be like, and I took that literally.
Oh my gosh, yeah. You mentioned like in my bio, I talk about the Brooklyn Public Library. My parents took me every single weekend growing up, and it was like I used to like run away, and they would have to like ask the librarians, where is my child? And I'd be in the adult section picking out books, and they'd be like, are you gonna read all of them? Yeah, I was. And I'd come back 15 books finished, and I'd be like, yep, and I enjoyed this one the most. Like, I like, for some reason, I remember reading Wicked the most vividly. like that book is very different from the musical. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was like 9. I was like, whoa. like, but yeah.
Meanwhile, I read Christopher Pike when I was in elementary school. My mom literally tore the pages out and took it to the library and was like, "Why was this in the library?"
Please,
Oh,
not
child.
that.
That's it.
Oh yeah, I was just reading. I was like, and if I had questions, I'll ask. I don't know.
Can your parents give mine some tips? So, Amali mentioned this, and then you mentioned this, and I used the exact same phrasing in my questions, which is that a lot of this book feels like a love letter to Brooklyn and Crown Heights, which does. So, how did your own childhood growing up here influence the way you wrote the book?
So I did not grow up in Crown Heights. I was not telling people where I grew up. Like, you don't.
That's
need to know
true.
that.
You did.
Like, I was like, you don't need to know exactly where in Brooklyn I grew up. That's crazy. But a huge part of it is that every weekend I did go to Crown Heights because I went to the main branch of the public library, and so much of it influenced, like, my childhood influenced this book, like down to like the small things of like block parties. I remember I used to, like, my mom worked in an early childhood center, and every summer they would like open the fire hydrant, and like we would have like hydrant parties, and I remember that, and the ice cream truck being like very like relevant to my life. And I like left New York for 4 years, and like these are the small things I remembered, and that's what I wrote into this book, and writing about Brooklyn and how it actually, I feel like people that don't live in the city don't realize how much of a microcosm and how much of a community Brooklyn on its own is. Like, you could live in Brooklyn all your life and not leave it, and still there's more to see. There's still more things to do. And I really wanted to pay homage to like the smaller things about Brooklyn and like having that kind of community, because again, I think that sometimes, especially now as I'm seeing the place that I grew up in change, small things are forgotten. I know everybody in my childhood building, and they know me. Like, they will ask about my sister by name. They'll ask how my mother is doing. Like, they know these things, but that's not that kind of community. I don't think it's always found everywhere in Brooklyn, because sometimes, I don't think it's often, but sometimes I think when people move from outside of the city, they don't conceptualize that you are meant to build community with the people around you, with the people that have lived here before you. You are joining a community. You are not starting something new here. And so that's something that I really wanted to like write about, how these kids grew up within a 6-block radius of one another. And they knew the guy who in the brownstone that died, that like they knew that he cooked the best like mac and cheese. Like, they knew this about him. They knew that if it was really hot outside, that even though he was a curmudgeon, he would give them Italian ices. Like, small things like that. I feel like I really wanted to write about some of the things that are getting lost. Like, even I remember that when I was growing up, there was like the regular Mr. Softy, but then there was like a guy with a pickup truck with a freezer on the back. His name was Mr. Johnny, and he would drive by the elementary school, and we would buy ice cream through the gates, like in the like where we played. Like, that's what I grew up knowing.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to write about something like that. And like that we're at the core, like, this is a community that we live in, and it's important to be a part of it instead of trying to change it. But yeah.
That was like a major theme of the book, was like the role that gentrification is playing in a lot of communities in New York, but specifically in Crown Heights, right? Like, you have like an entire plot arc that is about a person who won't be named, whom we hate, who like wants to turn her entire brownstone into like condos for rich white transplants.
Exactly. And I think it was important that she not be a transplant, that she is someone that grew up there, because I think that's also something that happens, right? Like, somebody will like come back home and they'll be like, oh, I don't like that's where respectability politics like play in, where they're like, oh, I don't like this place that I've grown up in. Let me change it. Like, let me and she even makes a threat in the book where she's like, oh, I wonder what would happen if the police got involved. That's a crazy threat to make against kids of color. Like, that's insane. They're all
literal children.
Yeah,
too.
all they're doing is being annoying. Like I'll admit that like teenagers are annoying, and they're annoying. Like they're running past her house being loud, like late at night. They're annoying, but like that's a crazy threat to make. But I think that also happens sometimes. Like people will leave where they grew up, forget where they grew up because they're like, oh, I am above this, I'm better, and then they'll come back and try and change it to what they think is better. I just thought that it was not as interesting or nuanced to write about somebody coming in to change it. I thought it was important to show that sometimes you're not to. This is a weird thing to say here. Not all skin folk are kinfolk, and I thought that was important to put in there.
Well, I mean, you also had like this great foil of Keith, who was like that lady's son.
Yeah.
Right? And so like you have this group of kids who I know we're getting off script here, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry.
But, you had this group of kids who like all grew up together, who are really tight, who like grew up in this community, love this community, are very entrenched in it, have like these tendrils of their lives like threaded throughout the entire neighborhood. And then there's like this guy who like comes in and like he sort of knows them, sort of doesn't, but like he's really disconnected from like the culture of Crown Heights and from like everything going on, but he's still trying to insert himself in it. He's still trying to like get with like one of the girls in the group. And so I thought it was really cool, like how you kind of played with these different experiences in the neighborhood and like what it can represent to different people and like what different people might want it to be versus what it actually is.
Yeah, because I mean, from one perspective, like Keith is somebody that wants to be a part of this community for real, and they're being gatekeepers. They're kind of being mean about it, but also he's gross. So like,
he's being weird about it. If he's normal about it,
no, exactly. He's a weirdo, like he's a freak. So it's like you don't get to sit on your stoop and be like, yeah, I'm reading Dostoevsky. Like, shut up, nerd. Like, I don't know, like be normal. Like so, like there are two ways about it. So yeah,
I don't want to like spoil anything, so I'll just say this very vaguely. But like the bit at the end with the Great Gatsby, it was like, I don't remember the exact words you used, but like this high school ass book.
Yeah, no, like I'm sorry, you can't be like, oh yeah, I'm reading the Great Gatsby for the first time, and be like you're reading a book for 11th graders. Be serious.
He's like, I don't think her.
Like, no, you should have already read it 3 times if you're talking about it now. Like, don't do that. But yes.
Oh my god, fucking Keith. My dad's name is Keith. I was like, I took this so personally that he was the worst.
Oh my god, no, I feel like I named him something else at first, but I think I was like, I need to save that for something better. This man's name can't be Keith. Like it's gonna be Keith. Like, it couldn't be something cooler. Like, I was like, I know cool Keiths, but like this Keith wasn't. No. Like, but yes. Like, oh, and you know, I did name him after I love One Tree Hill. I love One Tree Hill, and I was like, who's a guy from One Tree Hill who's obsessed with a woman who is barely giving him time? And it was Keith. Like, he loves Karen, and Karen's barely paying him any attention. Everybody should stream One Tree Hill. Like, it's so good. But yes.
So each of the characters in the book, including Keith, fits a certain horror archetype, and they all manage to both meet these archetypal standards and also subvert them in really cool and interesting ways. So can you tell us more about how these characters came to life in your head, aside from like being from One Tree Hill?
Yes. Okay, so I literally wrote out archetypes first. Like, that is what I did. Like, I was like, oh, so you have the blonde, you have the nerd, yeah, you have the gay kid, you have, who is also the black kid. Because I was like, and I thought that was, again, really funny because half of them are black. So, like, can you really call him the black kid? And then also having the final girl. And then I think the hardest, and you have the asshole, the nerd. I think the hardest one for me to really nail was there is a trope where it's like the stoner, but that didn't feel right because they all smoke weed. So I was like, that can't be it. But then I thought about, like, very often, one of the second to last people to die is like that one standoffish kid, right? who is like, oh, I'm above this, and then they suddenly die. And that's the independent kid. And that's oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her name. Oh my god. What are my children's names? I don't even have my phone. She's Layla. Layla's her name. So she's an artist. And
I wasn't gonna spoil it, but
no, it's okay. It's fine. I think it's very obvious. They say it within like 40 pages in the book. So Layla, and she was the hardest for me because I was like, I really need that. Like that's such a really broad trope. Like that's not very specific. But having to like, I don't know, working on her was actually the most interesting way for me to like form a whole character because I didn't really have an archetype for her. She just had to like be someone. And for me to create like nuanced characters while having them fit these archetypes but also subverting them, I have to think of each of them as the protagonist of their own story. So each of them kind of has to be a final girl in their own way. And like some of them don't make it to the end. But some of them might. Like that's the whole point. And I always do this really like basic nonsense that I learned in like a elementary school creative writing class where I write their name and I write their goal, like very basic, like motivation, like all of that till I get to what their solution would be. And then from there I'm like, oh, let me build a Pinterest board because I need visuals, I need vibes. And that's how I feel like with each revision, I feel like there is a way where I can beef them up. And I think that sometimes too, that characters don't always feel connected to the narrative because they feel outside of the context of their relationships within a story. And this is such a tight friendship group that I felt that each and every single one of them needs to exist within the context of their relationships with the other characters. Like, to each and every other character, they are somebody slightly different because that's how you are with people in real life. And that's something that I had to think about, even if I was only writing from Devin's perspective, like because it shows up in the smaller moments that she is watching between someone else. Because like the way that Layla speaks to her is so different from how she would speak to like Gael or Yaya or Drew or Malachi. Like, and that's important for her to see that, because when you see other people, like sometimes you register that even on a like micro level.
I mean, that kind of connects to, I was going to talk about how like found family is a really big deal in this book and like how well developed all of these different characters are. And I was going to ask, how do you go about making them feel so real? It's like, you just answered that. So instead, I'm going to ask two questions. They're kind of related. One is for like people reading this book who wish they had a found family and they don't yet. What would you say to them? And two is one that I just kind of thought of while you were talking, which is like that unlike a lot of teen like horror thriller novels, the parents are like very present and very supportive throughout this book. And so also like, why did you choose to do it that way? And like, what are you trying to say to teens about like the role, so here both of like found family and of your actual family?
Yeah. For people that haven't have their found family yet, go outside more, touch grass. No, I'm joking. I found one of my closest friends on Twitter. There she is. I think it's important to actually put yourself out there. I don't think you'll be able to find like a found family without making yourself vulnerable. Vulnerability is a huge part of getting to know a person, which is really scary. But I think it's important to do. Even the people I know from high school, I feel like I am so much closer to them as an adult because I feel comfortable in a place where I can be more vulnerable with them. I think that high school is such a time of invulnerability, where you don't want anyone to touch you or the soft bits inside of you because that makes you a target. And like even in your own head, there could be literally no eyes on you, but you'll feel like a target. But give it time, give it space, don't push it. And I think that people will gravitate towards you. I feel like everyone out there has a person, even if they don't think so. And then for, what was your second question?
Like the parents, like the Benatis, and also,
Right. well, all these are very ethnic parents.
Mhm.
Like the Benanis are Sephardic Jews, and then Gael's mother is Latina, and then Yaya's parents and Devin and Drew's parents are black. Um, I'm sorry, they're like running around Brooklyn doing whatever. Yeah, their parents gonna be like, "Hello, where are you?" Because that's what my parents did. Like, my parents were pretty loosey goosey. Like in high school, like if I was out past a certain time, they'd be like, "Okay, but you will text me where you are, and you'll text me where you're sleeping, and I will hear from you in the morning." Just because like my parents were very involved, and I just feel like that was so typical of the parents I also knew of my friends. Like they were present, they knew what was going on, and that just I don't know, that just resonated with my upbringing, where I was like, I could be outside and whatnot, but I feel like my parents always knew what I was up to, even the bad stuff, because we had established a relationship where they would be like, I mean, if you need help, you can just call and I'll help. Like,
Yeah.
because that's important in establishing that kind of trust. And I really wanted to write a relationship between parents and children where that trust is established and automatically assumed. Like, they maybe or maybe not they'll break it because they're teenagers and that's what happens. You have to learn, but I think often with YA, the parents automatically don't assume that trust, and that doesn't feel always so true to life for me.
Yeah. Like I find that in YA, yeah, it's either like you said, the parents are really like suspicious and critical or disconnected, or they're dead, right? Like somehow they are off screen for the sake of the plot. And I thought that it was really like, I don't know, there's something like so cozy to me, like reading it and being like, oh, like, and here's like, Devin and Drew's mom, and she's just like so welcoming, and they're gonna walk into the house and they're immediately going to feel safe with her, and like same with like Layla's parents. And I think that's really important, even if like you as a teen, even if you don't have parents like that, seeing representation of like that's what your parents should be.
Yeah. And then also friends' parents also being a second set of parents. I like so many of my friends that I've known for a long time, their parents will speak to me as if I am also their child, because like that's the role that they've assumed, and I'm like, no, that makes sense to me. Like that's resonating, like yes, because then they'll also express their pride in the same way that my parents would. And yeah, like that just feels like, again, this goes back to the idea and concept of a community existing in this space, right? And that's another part of it, like where you have several sets of parents that live within the same 6 blocks that will parent you as if they're your child. Even now, like I like when I like I'm home, I'll have a neighbor who's like, if they like, I'll see like teenagers acting out, right? And because that's what teenagers do. And a neighbor will be like, hello, and we'll gather them. That's not their parent. Like, but they respect them as if they were. But that's the community that has been built there. But yeah.
That definitely came through. Let's see. I might have asked. No, I didn't ask everything. So a major theme in the book is Devin's relationship with her twin sister, Drew. So when we meet them at the start, they have spent the past few years growing apart, with Devin very much feeling like she's in her sister's shadow. So I think a lot of people would, or a lot of authors would default to treating Drew like the main character, because she has all these like chosen one, like special attributes, right? Like she's super smart, she's been sent to a special school, like all the makings of a classic protagonist. But instead you focus on Devin, which I think is a much more interesting choice and ended up making for a more exciting book. So what led you, one, to do that, and two, to construct this kind of relationship between the sisters?
Drew is a protagonist that never appealed to me because that's so boring. I feel like you would immediately I think that she's so logical that basically everything would make sense almost immediately. There would be no sense of discovery when the reader reads it, because I feel like in her brain she would lay out exactly how she feels, and because everything to her isn't so emotion, it's like, how does it make sense in the world that exists for Drew, right? And that just never appealed to me. I was always like, I want to again, I wanted to write somebody who is very different from me. So somebody who is very extroverted and very like emotion forward. And I feel like I really got that with Devin. And then for the relationship, I knew immediately I wanted them to be twins because my dad is a twin. So like I don't know why that like immediately resonated with me. I was like, my father's a twin, so they must be twins. And then I kind of came up with Devin. I was like, what is like a very arbitrary opposite of her, right? And then I also thought about my sister, who we had very different schooling. My parents, like we talked about, I went to private school on a scholarship, and my sister was not interested in that at all. She saw all I had to go through, and she was like, that's not for me. And she actually went to a specialized high school for dance because she was a ballerina. And so she went to public school. And I thought about, like, again, how arbitrary those differences are, because I was like, I feel like me and my sister are very similar still in like how we process the world. And then from like these arbitrary differences, I delved deeper into like if it's so arbitrary, why are they not connecting? And I think that their entire relationship is built on this like insane thing where they just don't have the same communication style. And it's as simple as that. Like the beef between them is because they just simply don't know how to like one is very emotional, one is very logic forward, and they just don't know how to communicate with one another. And I didn't want there to be like any extra outside factors on that. Like, this is about two sisters who like literally can't sit down and speak to one another, because that would mean having to acknowledge somebody else's perspective, and they are both in a lot of ways very similar in that they're like, this is my world. Mm-hmm. And you're all living in it. And I like just that idea of that relationship was really fascinating to me. And then telling it from Devin's perspective, I know that in a lot of ways that kind of makes Drew a villain throughout a lot of the book. And I remember when I was writing it, that was actually something that we had to work on a lot, because I'm very like defensive of of Drew. I love her, but I understand why somebody wouldn't. And I remember having to send it to my friend because I was like, is she really that bad? Like, I don't think she is. But again, that it just made me realize that it really is about perspective, and like this novel is about perspective, and it pushes the ideas of who is, like, are you defined by like what you are on an arbitrary level of what people see you as, or as who you see yourself as, or is it a mix of the both? And I think it is that. That, like, I know it sucks to say, but I think it's realistic that you are what society says you are, mm-hmm. right? Because that is how you are when you move throughout the world. But who you are inside also matters. And I wanted to kind of portray that on a micro level between these two sisters, because they both have a lot of truths to them. And when what they share with one another, there's a lot of truth to it. But it's also like, how are you being received? Like, that's important. But yeah.
Well, I mean, and Drew presents such different faces to Devin, mm-hmm. and like her like home community than she does to like her private school friends and Avery and all them, which is also really interesting.
How Drew does not go by Drew at school; she goes by Andrea, which everyone's like immediately like Devin is like, who is Andrea? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Who is that? And she's like very. Drew's very like adamant about how her home community cannot call her Andrea, and what that means is like very specific. But yeah,
I also love how I was reading the book, and like, you know how it can be like Andrea or Andrea, mm-hmm. and I was like, I immediately knew it had to be Andrea.
I'm so glad, because I literally had to. I was like, oh no. I remember they were doing the audiobook, and I was like, oh no, I need to email people and be like, it's Andrea. Like, I need you to be so for real. I don't want to hear Andrea. I don't know who that is.
I was like, I know she's not introducing herself to these private school people. It's Andrea.
No. I was like, it's Andrea, and I'm very serious about it. There are a lot of names in the book that I was like, this is how it's pronounced, and I'm very for real. Like, I don't know, at one point it was like Devon or Devin. I was like, don't piss me off. Like,
Devon, no.
It's Devin. Like, don't do that. But yeah.
All right, lightning round before we go to audience questions. You've done this with me before.
Yes.
So, what character was the hardest to write, and what was the easiest?
Malachi was the hardest. Keith was the easiest.
I was about to start counting down.
Keith.
What song is the top of your playlist for this book?
Oh my god, I have it. I was gonna sing it because I can't remember the name.
Sing it.
No. I'll say a different one. Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by the Eurythmics.
Nice. What is your favorite horror movie?
Scream.
What is the best murder weapon?
Bat.
Interesting. All right. What is a book, new or upcoming, that you are looking forward to reading?
Oh shit. I don't read as much as I should. I just bought one called Curse Bunny by Borachang because I'm trying to do the Women in Translation month, the next month, and I'm trying to only read books that are by women or translated by women next month.
You have to let me know how that is.
Yeah.
All right, last question is, if you're allowed to say, what is next for you?
Okay, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. My editor's assistant is here. I'm going to blame her if I'm not supposed to say it. So, my third novel, I just turned in the first draft last month and a half ago, and it is a murder mystery set in what is maybe the Berkshires. I haven't really decided. I just was like, it's in New England because I love New England. And it is in dual POV and stars a family who owns a funeral home.
I already like it.
Yeah. And it's also about a beauty brand. Don't ask me how those relate, but they do.
All right, let's open it up to the audience questions.
Hello.
Were there any horror characters that you revisited or talked to in your head as you were planning or writing this book?
Were there any classic horror characters that I talked to when writing this book? Yes. Sidney Prescott is always living right up here. I actually thanked Wes Craven last in my acknowledgments as if he was my father. I was like, and thank you to Wes Craven for all that you've done. I'm crying as I write my acknowledgments. This man is dead. Sidney Prescott, who else? Ghostface in all his iterations. Michael Myers and all his iterations. I'm just listing my faves now. That freak demon in It Follows that doesn't have a name.
Oh, no.
The STI in It Follows. I'm always talking to him up here. I'm like, it's you. But I always, whenever I think of It Follows, the only, I'm not thinking about any of the other versions of him except that really tall man that walks in. That's the only one I remember. I'm like, that's the STI. He doesn't even look like that half the movie. But yes, those are the horror villains I kept right up here. But yes. Hi.
Do you think you would have survived longer in the finish or the Blonde Eyes?
Oh, the Blonde Eyes first. Yeah, the finish was I don't know. That's a lot of physical tasks. I'm not doing all that. Running through a maze when it's hot, no. And then, I get hot. It's hot outside. I can't do it. And then horseback riding, love it. But, unfortunately, I am so high maintenance. I'm not getting no water, on a horse. That's crazy. No. I'm extremely high maintenance. I'm too high maintenance for that. But the Blonde Eyes first, I definitely think I could, survive that. I do. Yeah. I feel like I can go toe-to-toe with a demon. That's one thing about me. I'm I can scrap. I believe that. I fully believe that. But yes. Hello.
Hello. What made you choose the Ouija board as a plot device?
So funny. I've, never seen a Ouija board in real life. My parents are don't bring that shit in my house. So I didn't. But when I was thinking about horror in general, I was like, what is the weirdest, scariest thing I could think of? And it was literally the Ouija board. I was like, that makes me so uncomfortable, right? It just is ugh. So what I did was I watched that one movie, Ouija, which was not scary. It's bad. But then I watched scarier short films called Ouija on YouTube. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to lock in. Like, it's going to be a Ouija board. And I also was like, I just don't know what's a silly way people could, like, summon a demon. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry, these kids weren't, like, forming a circle. like they just weren't going to do it. Like, all of them were not about it in the first place. Like, every last one of them were like, what is this? Like, all of them suddenly decided to be, like, believe in God in that one moment when they were all like, I don't even believe. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, where's Jesus? Yeah, no, so I was like, what is something that somebody else would do in front of them? And it was like, Ouija board. And also something my parents would never be into me having. Like, my dad barely even likes that I have tarot. Like, the tarot card's like, a Ouija board? No, never. My family's very religious. But yes. Oh, hello.
Do you have any hot takes about horror?
Do I have any hot takes about horror? Ooh. I have hot takes about everything, as you know. What are hot takes about horror? Nothing is scary right now. Nothing is scary right now, and it's all because we've forgotten to be afraid of things. I think we've all forgotten to be afraid of, like, real things, like scary things, because we're so worried about, like, exactly. We're all afraid of, like, politics, and I'm like, what about the dark? like, I don't know. And then also, I think that so many people have forgotten that horror is not about aesthetics. It is about reflecting the legitimate fear of a society. And the girls aren't doing that anymore. They're just like, what if I did a jump scare? And a jump scare is just adrenaline. That's not real terror. Another hot take, a lot of horror is not focused on terror. Like, that's different. Terror is something that you should feel afterwards. It is not screaming. It means that you're thinking about it still. Like, you need to leave somewhere and still be thinking about it. Like, I saw Longlegs. Not a scary movie, but terrified. Like, very different. There was literally a single jump scare. And it was, like, because I saw Nicolas Cage's face. And I was like, ooh. Like, that was scary. Like, I was like, why do you look like that? But otherwise, no, I was haunted afterwards. I felt bad. I felt like, ew, I feel icky. That's terror. We need to feel that again. Like, I don't know, run that back, bring that back. That's one thing. But yeah.
Two more questions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Certainly you've been writing since you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously your process has evolved. But how would you say your process has evolved, if at all, over now you're on your third novel?
Yeah. I think that I am, I wouldn't say faster. I think I'm definitely more organized. Like, I am, with my first book, I did a very I did an outline, very loose. With my second and third, chapter by chapter outline, I'm very regimented with my time as well. If I have to lock in, I'm locked in, and I'm doing 2,000 words a day because the book has to be done. I think a huge part of it is that I had to learn how to treat this as a job because it's my job. And I think that's something that a lot of aspiring writers don't realize, that this is employment. You are being paid. Somebody gave you money, and that means you have to do it. And hopefully do it on time, because it's not just you. This is a whole process, and you have a lot of people relying on you to turn it in on time so that no one else is stressed about this. And that's definitely something that I've had to learn. And I feel like it has made me a better writer, because it's made me a cleaner one. Because I know I don't have time to mess around with an extra draft or two unless I really, really need it. But yeah. Thank you. Are we done? No more questions? Yeah? Yeah? All right.
Let's give it up for Joelle. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. Thank you to Victoria for moderating such a great
Thank you,
conversation.
Victoria.
Thank you, Joelle, for celebrating this launch with us. So, some final reminders before we wrap up. If you're still with us on the YouTube live stream, you can buy a copy by clicking the link in the description. For those of you with us tonight, we have plenty of additional copies available for purchase at the register where you checked in. We also have some copies, of course, of Their Vicious Games and of Victoria's novels, A Shot in the Dark and A Lesson in Vengeance. I highly recommend checking those out.
Both are very good.
Exactly. Joelle will be around to sign and personalize your books, as I said earlier.
I am.
That's going to be happening right where my coworkers are pointing to. It'll all make a little bit more sense in a minute. Please just line up down this center aisle and along those shelves. Make sure to grab all of your personal belongings with you and have a great rest of your night. Let's give it up for these two once more.